Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 90, Exhausted and Ready for a Break, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi Sarah.
Hi Matt.
I wanted to talk to you today to see whether you've had the same experience with having conversations with your clients and the people that you talk to that I'm having at the moment. And what I want to understand is it because of the time of year, or is it because of it's coming out of a pandemic, or is it because there's a new world that we're sort of exploring given where we're at the moment? And so this is the concept of people being really tired and people sort of burning out. And I see this happening a lot at the moment where, and look, I've seen it this time of year, like, people are just saying end of the year, getting towards Christmas. You hear statements and comments from people like saying, just get through to the end of the year and then we'll have a break and then we'll get refreshed and then we'll start again. And so I've heard this pattern for the last 30 years of working, obviously. But there just seems to be something a little bit different to this particular burnout. Now, that's the other thing I need to also recognise too, is that I live in Victoria, Australia, which we're the world's most locked down state in the world, I hate to say, but we are. And I'm not sure whether that's also exacerbating some of the burnout, the pressure, the tiredness that's going on, or whether it is a, experience because of the pandemic. But really what I wanted to explore with you is that are you feeling or hearing the same things? But then also, what does that do in business? What does that do for us? How do we respond to that? What are the things that we need to be conscious of to ensure that it means that we can manage through this effectively, but not just manage it, because I never like to do things just to survive. You want to do things to make it, to really thrive and make a bigger impact. So I really like to explore this topic of maybe fatigue, tiredness, burnout in business, and whether it's a seasonal thing, whether we're in a new normal now with the post-pandemic or coming, whether we are post-pandemic or not. But yeah, just wanted to get your thoughts. Are you experiencing with the conversation you're having with people the same as what I've just sort of indicated then?
I was in a group session this morning where people were talking about concerns, and it's really interesting. There was one woman who's also in Victoria, and she was talking about the level of exhaustion and burnout in businesses. She works with large organizations, and the fact that means that maybe decisions don't get made, or decisions don't get made well. And it felt, as I was listening to her, as though that was a really that's something that's been coming on and getting worse, and she doesn't really see an obvious end to it. I'm very aware that as Victoria's in this kind of, we're free for the first time in a long time, Europe's going in the opposite direction completely. So I'm part of very much an international community, and I think we're all very aware of what's going on, as are most people these days, in different countries around the world. So some of the exhaustion, I think, is from the sheer unpredictability. That was something that was brought up this morning, just like not knowing. One of the things I detect is people are still talking about when's everything going to go back to normal. There's still this sense that we'll just get over it and we'll go back to normal. And yet, underlying that, I think people know that it's not going to be like that. The economic disruption that's happened, I think people are feeling that a lot, and they're feeling afraid of it. So it's like, I just want to go back to normal, and if I'm really honest, I can see it's not going to go back to normal. And I don't know how to deal with that. That creates a lot of stress because people are just kind of holding this tension all the time of something that we're going to pretend it's all going to be fine, but we know perfectly well that it's not.
It's interesting you talk about, there's people that are saying they wanted to go back to normal. I kind of also experience people, and even myself, that says, I don't want it to go back to normal. I don't want it to go back to the way it used to be because it was unsustainable. I thought business was getting to the stage of being unsustainable. I thought our lives were getting to the stage of being unsustainable in terms of working and living at a frenetic pace and trying to be all things for all people and trying to achieve a lot. And I think that was starting to take its toll. And that was on sort of on me. And then also I could see it on other business owners as well. And I can see that we've got an opportunity not to do that now because there's this acceptance. And also, a thing that we're hearing a lot in Australia that's happening, probably not necessarily in Australia just yet, but in other parts of the world, around this concept of the great resignation, of people starting to think about, well, what is it that I want to do in my life? And am I really wanting to be in this job or in this profession, or, is there something else that I can do? So I think the word that you used before, that I think makes a huge amount of sense, which could add to this maybe fatigue feeling or the tiredness, is this uncertainty about, well, what is the future? What is it that I want to be in the future? And what is it our businesses want to be in the future? And as business owners, how do we manage all of that too? Because we're effectively managing relationships with people, whether they're team members or whether they're clients and customers or suppliers. We're feeling all of that coming at us, because and everybody feeling differently about it. As you say, the ones that wanted to just go back to the way it used to be and don't change, I just wanted to go back. And the ones are going, hang on a minute, I don't know if I want this to go back. And the ones that are very clear that they don't want it to go back. So it's almost like that level of, we just don't know. And there's so much, I suppose, diversity and uncertainty creates this maybe anxiety. And we know that when you're in an anxious state, you're elevated, your sort of, heart elevates, and your body starts to operate on adrenaline. And maybe that also creates the fatigue and the tiredness too. So maybe all this is sort of connected together as to why there's potentially an extra level of tiredness and burnout and pressure that we're experiencing right now, because of what you were just saying there about the uncertainty of it.
Yes, and then you add in another factor, which also came up in the group that I was talking to this morning, which I think people feel and experience in different ways, of not knowing who and what to trust anymore. So what used to be more or less trustworthy, you knew which media sources you could trust and which media sources you could never really trust, because they were always, they were always going to dramatize everything. They were always going to totally focus on the negative. But that's all shifted a lot. So the people's attitudes, they're very varied, I see. Very, very varied. But you have a significant percentage of the population who feel that their trust has been betrayed in many ways, so that what they used to be able to trust, they're not sure if they can trust anymore, or they know they can't trust, and it's across the range. So when you're in business and you don't quite know who to trust and what to trust, so even this, it's like the ground that your business is founded on is beginning to shift. It's like trying to walk over on an earthquake or something. I think that makes the uncertainty that much more uncertain, because you're not sure always where to turn to for that sense of solidity and support and stability. And I think that makes it even more difficult. I feel like we're kind of piling on the woes at the moment, but that's
Yeah.
probably, well, it's realistic. We are actually living in a world that I do think we need to acknowledge, because probably as business owners we're so used to just getting on with it. I think we need to acknowledge that it is extraordinarily challenging. It's extraordinary and challenging as a simple human being. When you add into that whatever kind of business you have, and there are so many different types of businesses and every single one has its own challenges. When you put all of that together, like, we should not underestimate just what it is that we are handling at the moment.
And I think that's true, that we probably don't always give ourselves the acknowledgement or credit for the fact that we are managing a lot, and generally, but we're probably managing a lot more even so now. But you're right, we are talking about piling on a lot of this stuff. And if I talk about the positiveness of, also on the balance side of the fence, I did a thing with my team this week where I said, let's just talk about the celebrations and the challenges. So give me one celebration of something that's really good that's working in the organisation, and something that's a challenge, to make sure that we keep that balance going, so we don't just consider all the challenges and the problems that are going on. But so I think it's important to keep balance. There's no problem. There's no doubt about that. But if we are talking about this uncertainty, business is uncertain at the best of times. We know that. We know the statistical data around, failure and that sort of type thing, and it's difficult. But yeah, this adds an extra layer of uncertainty, which creates that level of greater fatigue. But equally, it creates opportunity. Some businesses I know don't feel it or aren't feeling the impact upon it financially, but they are emotionally. Okay, so what I mean by that is they're still managing team members that are probably struggling with things, and family, and clients and those sorts of things. So we're all impacted, no matter whether we're financially impacted upon this stuff, we're all impacted upon it because we're dealing with human beings and we're dealing with relationships. And really, as we've discussed before, business is really fundamentally just another platform for relationships to really be created and evolve.
Yeah, and I can see in myself, I saw some news one day last week, and it was a bit of news that just impacted me. Like I really felt my heart sink when I saw it. Somebody else, it will be a different piece of news that makes their heart sink. But I think there's a lot of heart sinking news at the moment. And when you see that, like I realized immediately that was actually impacting me. And if I went into a business conversation there and then, it would have impacted the conversation. We would have had a different conversation from what we would have if I hadn't seen that news. Now, that can happen at any time, that's life, but it's happening a lot. And so we're having to handle ourselves and our own emotions and our own energy and our responses to what's going on in the world, I think, at a level that probably we haven't had to do since maybe the Second World War. I mean, I can well imagine that during the Second World War it would have felt quite similar in a way. You're waiting for the next attack, or and that the tide goes this way and then it goes that way, and you're constantly watching to see what's happening and which directions are things going. And the Germans would have been looking at it one way, the British or the Americans or the Russians, everyone would have been looking at their own news. They're all in the same war in different positions in that war, but fundamentally the human beings at the heart of it are experiencing more or less the same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you were talking, I was thinking about that concept of the emotion that we have as individuals, and it's almost you have to disconnect that from what you're just about to do. Like you've had some emotional thing that has occurred, and then you're just about to go into another business conversation or another conversation with a team member or something like that. It's almost like you've got to shut down everything that you are feeling about because you don't want that to impact upon being present and having the conversation with the person, that because you don't want to influence in a negative way an outcome that would be not appropriate, like you say, when you're going into that particular conversation. And I think about the energy that goes into that. Like there's a massive amount of energy to shut yourself down, to park whatever's going on, to then be present, and then to focus on whatever's in front of you at the time. And I can feel that maybe just by talking about the energy that I have to experience some days, where I have to forget about everything that I might be personally experiencing about the world or family or whatever is going on, or the news, or the drama, or even starting to think about things like, well, what does the future look like? What do the international relationships look like with different parts of the world? And is there a fatalist in me that says well, is there a hopelessness? And you got to shut all that down just to really just get on with whatever you're doing, because it's not appropriate to bring that stuff up at that particular point in time.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, in a way, there's a huge strength in being able to do that, to be able to be a professional and show up for what you're doing 100%, because that's kind of what keeps the world show on the road from a human perspective. If we can't do that, we don't have continuity in our lives, or stability. And at the same time, if we actually shut things off, um, and suppress what's going on in us, we're going to have to deal with it sometime. And you don't want that to be building up and building up. So, because that's a major cause of burnout. Like I try to find a way of being present that's not shutting things down. It's not very easy to do. It also takes a lot of energy. because or otherwise to make sure that every day I deal with the stuff that has, caught me or that's had an emotional impact for me, that I don't let that build up. Because that's really risky. I think, when you just have this underswell of worry and fear about the future, for example, we need to deal with those things on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, it will create so much stress inside you. It can really easily make you sick.
That takes a real discipline with what you're talking about, and it's something that I don't practice well enough because I probably don't address it and don't deal with it enough. To I'd probably just go from one day to the next day sometimes and not think about dealing with whatever that I should be dealing with, like what you're saying. So, and then other times I'm acutely aware of it and know that I have to deal with it because it'll build up. But I think it's a really good point that we need to make sure that we're conscious of is around not suppressing, as you say. It's still knowing that it's there, knowing that yes, you need to be professional and you need to get on with what you need to get on with, because that's what keeps the momentum and continuation going, like you're talking about. But that sense of not just suppressing it, parking it, and never coming back to it again is a really good thing to think about and a good lesson to keep remembering, because that does create the burnout, because it's layer upon layer of this sort of negative or stressful emotion that does create the burnout, the fatigue.
Yeah, it's a kind of nameless fear grows up inside you. I think that's one of the big, perhaps, benefits that I've got from the whole COVID pandemic story, is that I realized that I had to deal with things like that. And so generally, my husband and I, every morning we sit down, we relax together. But if there's anything that's bothering either of us, we'll always talk about it. And that's not a time where we say, "Oh, did you see what was in the news? Did you hear this? Did you hear that?" It's more like the attempt is to make peace with whatever it is, or to make a decision that will enable me to take that information in and know that I'm doing my best, the best that I can possibly do, to contribute to resolving whatever it is. I have to feel that there's an amazing guy who I've followed quite a lot during all of this pandemic stuff, called Dr. David Martin, and he says, this is really interesting. He says, if a problem comes to my attention, my understanding is that is my response. It is my responsibility to help to solve that problem. Now, given the problems that come to his attention, he has a lot of responsibility. But it made me think. So, if I'm really concerned about something that's happening in the world, I feel like I can either say, "Oh well, whatever. That's the other side of the world," or I can say, "What can I contribute that will actually, maybe it'll take a long time, but will actually help to make that better." Now, obviously, I don't want to take on a new project every day. And in today's world, you could probably take on a new project every day if you did that. But the alternative to answering that question is, "Oh, well, whatever, I'm going to shut it out." And that doesn't work well for me. So sometimes my answer is, my work that I've chosen to do, my contribution is this piece, and I know that there are people who are brilliant at doing that piece, and I'm not going to interfere with what they do because I'm only going to get in the way. I'm happy to help if I can, but I'm going to let them do their thing, and I'm going to focus on my thing. Sometimes I find that I need to kind of create space within what I'm doing for it to help to become a solution for some of the things that really bother me. Um, I need to have peace, and how you have peace in a world that's very turbulent is difficult. But I've really, really worked on that every single day over this last 2 years, and got better and better at it. Because the alternative, which is to feel constantly disturbed and worried, is just like, that's not a way that I want to live. I don't care how worrying the circumstances are. I don't want to live that way. My understanding is worrying about things makes them worse or doesn't contribute. It never contributes. Worrying doesn't solve problems. So so I don't want to, I'm not willing to live like that. And because of that, I had to find an alternative. It's not very easy sometimes. Sometimes it's easy, but I
It's
found it
interesting to talk
necessary.
about the word worry because worry, when you're going through that process of obviously problem solving, I sort of see worry as a part of the process of identifying all the concerns that you might have to then be able to help solve for them. Now, that's in a very negative way of describing the process of going from identification of an issue or a problem through to sort of finding, exploring all the possible issues that it could come to light. So all the what ifs that whether are possible or not possible, through to then finding solutions and that sort of stuff. And I can see that the worry part of that is the negative aspect of it, and it's also probably not necessary if you do it, because that's the emotive aspect of going through that particular process as opposed to the non-emotive. But just what you're saying before about the acknowledgement of it, I hear the word, it's almost like you clear it because of the fact that you acknowledge it, you address it, you identify it, and then eventually you become at peace with it. And the peace bit I can really feel when you talk about going through that particular process. And if you're constantly storing things up all the time and you never acknowledge them, resolve them, and become at peace with them, they, as you say, they just continually store up and create this nameless fear or nameless energy, negative energy that actually creates this, as you said, going back to this fatigue and burnout that we spoke about before, that you can't work out why you feel that particular way, but you are because of what you've just described, which is this build up without addressing what you actually have ignored or just pushed to the side.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually a really serious problem with what's happening at the moment. My feeling is that a lot of people are building that up and simply have no outlet. They don't know what to do with it. And I think that if it all stopped overnight, it would be also like the end of the Second World War or something, where people would just go crazy almost because there's so much boiling under the surface. And again, I want to say we shouldn't underestimate what we're dealing with. I think it's really natural that people feel like that. I'm lucky because I've had a lifelong or many years of experience of learning ways of dealing with these kinds of things. It's interesting when you talked about worry. I was thinking, for me, worrying, if I worry about something, it's like I'm trying to hold it in my head so that I don't have to feel it, because I don't want to have the unpleasant feelings that go with it. So for me, worrying is very unproductive. If I can allow myself to feel that thing that I'm worried about, then I start to work on the solutions. I start to be able to solve it. But as long as I keep it in my head, it goes round and round and round and round and just kind of builds energy around exactly the thing that I don't want to grow. So that was interesting to hear you describe that. I think that there's something else that's really important here, and it comes back to where what we started talking about at the beginning about, is there a normal, is there a new normal, or are we going to go back to normal? Whichever way we look at the world, as you said, looking at business, you realize that it was becoming unsustainable. We know that many of our behaviors around nature are way beyond sustainable, way, way beyond. We know that many of our social institutions and ways of behaving with each other are also not sustainable. They're not nourishing to human life, and they're not nourishing to nature that we're a part of. And it seems that that changing that is inevitable now. I actually see that this whole COVID thing in many ways is an agent of change. It's pushing us to change in ways that we knew that we had to, but we didn't really know how to do it. We didn't, we very rarely change if we don't have to. So the majority of people probably didn't quite feel they had to. They could externalize the problem. It's like, it's okay, it's over there. The more we're personally impacted, the more we feel we have to change. Everyone's personally impacted now at some level. So at the very big perspective, where I get beyond judgment of anything, I do see that change. We we are having to make changes in the way that we approach life and think about life and live and do business and all of these other things. And actually, we don't want to go back because it was to the world that produced where we are now. So we must look forward and look creatively at what we want in the future. It's very difficult to do when the current narrative is so strong. But if you said, let's say you'd had a really bad year in business, it's like terrible year, and you just think, oh my goodness, okay, we've had a terrible year, so we're going to have another terrible year, and we're going to have another terrible year. You're very likely to have that because all your plans will be based on the terrible year you've just had. If you've had a terrible year, you still have to look forward and think, well, what are we going to create or what are we going to do differently this year so that we can have a better year? And if you do everything based just on what you've already experienced, you won't have any power to create a better outcome in the future. Now, you can succeed or fail. That's life. You know, sometimes we try something and it doesn't work. So there's an enormous discipline required now to look to the future creatively instead of just reacting to the present. To me, this is the shift that will shift us as individuals and will shift us also as a collective, you know, as human beings in general. And making that kind of shift where we start, instead of just reacting to what's happening, reacting to bad news, because there's a whole lot more bad news that they can throw on us around climate. So, you know, let's not think this is over. Once this one's done, there'll be another great story to bring along. Instead of reacting to all of that, what are we creating? What are we contributing? What are we looking to experience in the future? How do we build or grow that? Eventually, what we're experiencing at the moment, I think, must push people in the direction of looking to the future. They'll get so exhausted in the end that they'll either give up or they'll shift.
And there's two aspects of that. It's sort of the ability to be in an environment where change is possible and change is acceptable because the realities we're forced to. So therefore, it's almost like an excuse to say, well, I can do this now because the world is now ready for it, or the world is accepting the fact that there is this particular change. And so we've got this great opportunity or great excuse if you want to use it that particular way. But then what we've also got is the ability, to, as you say, to look forward, to hope, okay? And I find that hope defeats fatigue and burnout. So I find that if I'm very forward thinking or thinking about something positive or the future in a very positive light, I get this sort of rejuvenation of energy, okay? And the rejuvenation of energy, therefore, replenishes the energy that's been depleted because of what we were speaking about before. So therefore, it's almost like acknowledging the situation, that the fatigue, where we're at, but then we're in this huge change which we can either, you know, accept as the narrative that's going to continue on in a negative sense, or we've got the ability to say, we've got a great opportunity to look at this and go, you know what? We've now got a new rule book, a new game that we can play. Let's actually go and see what else we can explore and how we can do things differently, which I think as soon as I start to talk or even think like that, I just get this burst of energy that comes in and this creativeness that I think, wow. And all of a sudden I just feel all that sort of negative fatigue and burnout start to fall away and drop away.
Exactly. That is so beautifully described and so really apt. And perhaps that, you know, one of the great opportunities now is that we have more permission to experiment than, or we can give ourselves more permission to experiment than we could before, because the world becomes very open when there's a lot of pressure. And you can try things out that you wouldn't have dreamt of trying out a couple of years ago. And yes, you can fail, you can succeed, and it doesn't matter so much either. most of the time. I heard somebody say this morning, I just want to be able to have conversations with people who disagree with me. And what she meant by that was, I want to be able to really talk with them. I'm sure a few years ago she just would have been saying, I just want to hang out with people like me. And now, because she's been forced into a situation where a lot of people disagree with her and they don't even want to talk to her, it's pushing her to open her mind to say, I don't just want to hang out with people who I agree with. I actually really want to understand and communicate with people who disagree with me. So that's a very personal example. But if you think about it in business, you can start to think, well, maybe this is a chance for me to do that thing that I've always wanted to do and couldn't really find a way, or didn't know how to do it, or couldn't figure it out. I definitely see that for me, that there's permission. There's permission for me to speak differently, to communicate differently with people, um, to I think to be more honest, to have a kind of deeper integrity, like really say it how I want to say it, not just trying to adapt to make sure that people like what I write or whatever it is. And I think there's a chance to take, it's not so much about taking risks, I think it's more about experiments.
Yeah, I agree, because I think some people can read this conversation and think you have to completely blow up your life or change your life by experiencing something dramatically new. I don't get that sense that we have to do that. And I think the experiment part is a really good way of describing it. You can experience certain aspects of it to ensure that you're exploring a fullness of life that we may have felt a little bit afraid to do in the past because there was such a restrictiveness, whereas now, as you say, there's a more of an openness because it's like, well, the world's a different place. The rule book's probably different. We're still working out the rules, so we've got an ability to explore something that maybe we thought we didn't have an ability to do in the past.
Yeah, and I see people doing this on the personal level. They're having conversations they might not have had, or they're thinking about, "Oh, what kind of person do I want to be actually?" I can see businesses doing it. I can see whole groups of people doing it as well. You can see that in some of the original peoples. They're really thinking about their relationship with the rest of humanity now, and how what kind of life could they be living. It's very exciting to see this surge of energy, I think, in groups that have been very undervalued in the mainstream of society. There's a strength that comes often to the underdog in challenging situations, and and people start relating differently with each other. I see people suddenly grow up who were like children before, and I see people who thought that they were great leaders and heroes, but actually they were a bit empty inside. They're having to drop down. They're being kind of, it's like I'm not sure if it's that the playing field is being leveled, but it's more like there's room for new people to stand up, and you can't deceive people as much as you could. If you are making empty promises, people won't wear it for much longer now. So there's an integrity and an honesty, I think, that comes through these very challenging situations as well.
Mm. Oh, it's been a full conversation as per usual, Sarah. I think we've explored pretty much. We started with fatigue and we've ended up in sort of this creative opportunity in space, which is helps to manage what we're managing at the moment. It helps to provide some hope and which creates greater energy for us, which, as we said before, defeats that the fatigue and the burnout. And this optimism of what's possible and experimenting with that, and being genuine and being honest and being and surfacing that sort of stuff like you were speaking a minute ago about. So look, I think it does present an amazing opportunity in our lifetimes, and people talk about the once in a generation opportunity sort of type thing, or and this could be it for us, but then it may not be. There could be another one that's around the corner that could push us again even further. But I think we could look at it to say, hey, we've got a real opportunity to do something with this that could actually be really great for our lives. And I think that that's really important to explore, acknowledge and explore without losing sight of the difficulty that we're currently in at the moment.
And what you described, then what happens is you discover where your own energy comes from.
Mm.
Actually, like you discover what's the key. How do I get to feel exhausted? How do I get to feel energized? When you know that, that's one of the, you could describe that as a life treasure in a way, to understand about energy and to know how to source energy that makes you feel alive and full and good. That is knowledge, real knowledge that you can hold inside you that's beyond any of the situation at the moment. So if that's something that comes out of this, that will be worth it.
Absolutely, because managing yourself is what we need to do to live a better life. So I think it's a acknowledgement of your own energy sources and how you manage them is a great outcome to this conversation.
Well, thank you very much, Matt.
Thanks, Sarah.
You've been listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. If you'd like some insight into the spirit in which you do business, a great place to start is by looking at your relationship with money. Find out more by taking the Money Scorecard at moneyscorecard.app, and we'll be back next week.